Good afternoon. This is a special meeting of the City of Morro Bay City Council. It is Tuesday, February 25th, 2020 at 3:30 p.m. We are located at the Veterans Memorial Hall, 209 Surf Street, Morro Bay, California. We do have a quorum of council members present, and I will call this meeting to order. Open it up with public comment. I do have one speaker slip. Aaron Oakes. Welcome back, Aaron. Good to see you. Come on up.
Good afternoon, board and staff. My name is Aaron Oakes of Morro Bay, and I just want to start my remarks by saying thank you so much for doing such a detailed 10-year financial report. In years past, we haven't really had this detailed breakdown of all the expenses and all the things that our city needs to stay running. There's a couple of constructive suggestions I have for the board and staff. One of them is, if you look on, I guess, page 11 on your physical copies of your handout, talks about perceived issues and problems facing Morro Bay. It says, I think it's 35% of the community feels it's an extremely serious problem that the cost of housing is going out of control. And I think one of the things that the city needs to be talking about is having a town hall on affordable housing. And sort of a poll on how much rent people are paying per month. And I did my own little sample analysis of housing and apartment rentals in Morro Bay. It's gone up within the past year. The average is now $1,700 a month. And so that's, for a young person like me, for a millennial to be working in this city, it's extraordinarily difficult to break even and to survive here. And I really love Morro Bay, and I speak for a lot of young people who want to live and work in Morro Bay. And that goes to my second comment, which is we need to have a discussion on job creation. One of the things, in order for Morro Bay to be sustainable, is to have industries. We invite industries in that can create jobs. So it's not just minimum wage jobs, it's salary jobs with full-time benefits, with health and dental, and having that coverage is really important. And I think that would bring young people here and work here, and the city would be benefiting from the taxes from these businesses. Some of these businesses, including but not limited to cannabis and hemp retail, I recommend one of the industries that should be brought in is recreational. And I think that would bring in a significant amount of revenue, because you're getting more than just the medical marijuana clientele coming in. And I think with some sensible policies going back and forth with the cannabis industry, I think that we will have a sustainable future as far as having a new revenue base for Morro Bay. But I think we need to talk about, as far as survivability for Morro Bay, bringing in those jobs and working with the planning department to make sure that the planning and building codes are all consistent and makes it easier for businesses to open up in Morro Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Public comment is still open. Any members of the public wishing to come forward, please do so now. Welcome, Barry.
Mayor, thank you. Council, I'd like to put public notice on an event that's going to happen, on Friday evening in Cayucas at 6 p.m. at the schoolhouse. There's going to be a presentation of the Toro Preserve, and I think I've got that wrong, but it's quite an extensive presentation. It includes the dog beach. It includes the Chevron change in property with Cayucas, and it's going to be quite extensive. I've seen some of the presentation, and it's quite educational. One of the things that was a takeaway to me is that one of the provisos that's supposed to come out of this exchange of properties is that Chevron will have 4 large parcels. You probably all know this, but some people don't, along the above Panorama Drive. And Chevron will be requesting the city to sponsor going to LAFCO to bring those 4 parcels into our city's sphere of influence. And it's quite educational to see what's going on, but I want to invite all the public to come. Some of you have donated to their campaign to collect the money for that, which was quite a monstrous job. How they did it, I'm not quite sure. But it's been done. I think the public needs to learn about it because we're going to have some new neighbors. Thank you.
Barry, I'm sorry, where was the location? Was that at their Veterans Hall?
No, sir, it's going to be held at the school.
At the school?
Schoolhouse is what they've posted. There's a sign actually posted on a fence in Cayucas. Someone sent me a picture of the sign. So it's at the Cayucas Schoolhouse at 6 p.m. on Friday.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Public comment is still open for items on the agenda. Anybody wishing to come forward to speak to items on the agenda, please do so now. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor. Having reviewed the 10-year financial forecast, we know that financially there's some hard times coming and some hard decisions to be made. And in that regard, I wanted to thank the city for sending out the questionnaire with our last water and sewer bill, asking the citizens their opinions on different subjects and allowing them to have input, versus hiring very, very expensive consultants. This is a minuscule cost in comparison, and so I'm thanking the city for doing that. I'm hoping they get a good return from all of the ratepayers, and they can incorporate their comments, whatever they are, to listen to the totality of the whole and not just 200. So thank you for that to the staff and to the city council. Secondarily, adding to Mr. Oak's comments having to do with housing affordability, I think housing affordability needs to also contain total affordability of living in Morro Bay, not just the amount of rent, but the amount that a person has to pay to live here, which includes their utilities, which obviously includes their water and sewer rates. I'm very sensitive to this. I've just, in the past 2 weeks, had neighbors move out, citing specifically their water and sewer rates. And so in these discussions that can and should take place, I encourage that the total for affordability, because just because you can afford the rent doesn't mean you can afford to live here. It has to be the total cost of living here. And so I would encourage that factor to be brought into what it costs to live in Morro Bay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dad. Public comment is open for any items on the agenda. Anybody wishing to come forward, please do so now. Seeing none. Oh, Barry? I didn't know if that was a finger or a hand that went up. Welcome back, Barry.
Thank you. I didn't know if I could request, one was a public announcement and one was on the agenda. On the agenda, there's I could say it's a fantastic report. I got a degree in accounting and I like that stuff. Anyhow, it's fantastically done, but there's a little paragraph on page 4, and it's to me it's a little bit of a problem because it states that we'll be over budget by or underfunded by $473,000. And one of the goals that's been stated for the council, and I know you work on it, was a financial sustainability of the city. And a repeated going over your budget without answers is troubling. And so I know we'll talk a lot about it, and I know we've going to give more money to T-bid and so on, but I don't see the other side of the revenue stream, which we all love, is the expense stream. And I frankly don't see that you're managing our money well. And this report reflects it clearly. It's a little bit of a shock to have the announcement come out about this budget meeting 24 and a half hours before the meeting. I'm sure there's a lot of people in town are not aware of it. And it's too bad that we couldn't have this $65,000 survey that you're going to present tonight be where the public could see it. It's almost like, oh gosh, we've got this report, we got to get it out. I don't think it reflected well. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment is still open. Any members of the public wishing to come forward for items on the agenda, please do so now. Seeing none, I will close public comment, bring it back, and turn it over to Ms. Callaway, our Director of Finance, to present the information, and Mr. Collins as well. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate your work, and turn it over to you.
All right, I'll start it off. Scott Collins, City Manager. Thank you, Mayor, Council members, community members, CFAC members in the audience. What you're going to get today is a flyover of the 10-year financial forecast. This is instituted several years ago at the city using a consulting firm that developed the model, which the city has since used on its own expense to build out to continue to provide council the long-term view of the city. Of course, keep in mind with the 10-year, it just presents, if you did nothing, what the situation would look like, much like when we present sort of what's coming next year. If we did nothing, this is what you end up with, and that's where the real work begins, right, in terms of policies, priorities, and decision-making. This agenda was posted on Friday. Just want to make sure that was noted. So what you'll hear from our finance director is the 10-year forecast. I will present the results of the community survey that was conducted in October and November of last year, as well as discuss the outreach we'll be doing into the community related to that. So I will turn it over to Jen, and I'll pick it up when she finishes the 10-year financial forecast. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to start off the 10-year forecast. As Scott mentioned, this is the model that was developed by Management Partners back in 2015. We've done internal updates to this for the last 2 years. So we're no longer utilizing the consultant for that, and we're doing it in-house. Last year's general fund budget showed a forecast when we looked in the out years, particularly to fiscal year 2021, that we're approaching a deficit of over $600,000. So based on the information that you've received tonight, you'll see that we've whittled that down a little bit. We still have challenges ahead, but we are doing a little better than we projected last year at this time. We've gone through and updated our revenues, and we've updated our expenditures. We're using this year as our base year, and then doing our estimates from that forward for the out years. And this is really the kickoff to our upcoming budget season. As we prepare the next budget, fiscal year 2021, we have to be mindful of what challenges we have in that year, but also in years 6, 7, 8, and plan well and plan accordingly. So we'll take feedback we receive here tonight, couple that with our community feedback, and try to develop a budget that meets all of those needs, or as many of those needs as we can within the parameters that we have. It's important to understand what assumptions we've built into the forecast, since that does drive all of the numbers in the out years. We have no COLAs built into the forecast. We talked a little bit about that last year, but we only forecast things that we are committed to. Our contract memorandums of understandings with our labor unions expire June 30th, so we have no obligations beyond that at this point. We are initiating negotiations now, so that may change in the coming months. But right now we have no commitment for anything beyond step increases, which is part of the annual performance review that each employee receives. If they perform or meet expectations, they're able to move up to the next step if there is another step in their series. So we've included the step increases only. There's increases to minimum wage that we're required to comply with, so we've included those for many of our part-time employees that fall in that category. We have estimated our pension costs. At the last council meeting, you provided direction and approval to pay off our Tier 2 and Tier 3 unfunded liabilities. We have not received updated actuarial reports since 2 weeks ago. So we've gone through and calculated what we expect our new pension rates to be given those payoffs. So there might be some slight differences in that as we get to budget. We've also estimated healthcare increases. The forecast for next year and the out years through 2029 includes a $60,000 contribution to our tourism fund. As you know, that's less than was authorized in the resolution establishing T-bid. We started to whittle that down last year and looking for some direction on where council would like to go in the next budget cycle. Also, there's no contribution for the general plan implementation items. Historically, there's been $100,000 budgeted in the general fund to do economic development and implementation plan items. We've removed that budget, and this current year budgeted $65,000, but there is no money budgeted forecasted in the 2021 or out years for that. The chamber contract, that was the one-time contract or one-time funds that we used in this current fiscal year for the economic ombudsman position. That is not included in the next fiscal year. If council chooses to do that, we would be looking for some one-time funds to continue on with that contract and fund that in the next fiscal year. We don't have contributions to, or we do have contributions to our replacement funds. They're minimal contributions at this point, but we have included something in terms so that we're being proactive for years down the road as we need to replace vehicles, equipment, do facilities repairs, that kind of things. And there's no capital project funding. The no capital project funding is a big concern. The next slide kind of illustrates just one example of what some of our needs are for capital funding. We recently completed an update to our pavement management project, and I know you can't read the image very well, but what that report came back saying was if we wanted to, if we spent only our current amount that we're spending on pavement management, which is about $700,000 a year, our PCI will decline. PCI stands for Pavement Condition Index, will decline from 66, where it is today, to 61. If we want to maintain our PCI of 66, we need to invest $2 million per year. If we want to obtain our optimal PCI, it would be $4.4 million per year. So that just gives you a sense of the needs we have in just one area in the city that we're not putting money aside for right now or included in the forecast. The next slide is a summary of the revenues and expenditures. On average, what the increases are included for assumptions in the next fiscal year and the out years. I did make a couple updates from what was provided in the staff report. In that 2021, I've updated the SLO County estimate for property tax, and that's a little bit of a change. And property tax in particular is an average of many of the different components of property tax, so it might not calculate out exactly as you look at the line item in the actual forecast. Again, no increases to salary, estimated increases for pension and our health care at this point. And when we talk about our replacement funds, we mentioned minimum funding for that. We have $50,000 included for vehicle replacement, $25,000 for technology, $100,000 for facilities, another $50,000, and that's really dedicated to our fire equipment. And to give you a sense of magnitude, our fire chief has a comprehensive replacement schedule and plan. In order to meet that fully, we would need to contribute about $330,000 a year for our replacement for fire equipment. That's expensive apparatus. So you can see we're not really touching that too much with a $50,000 allocation. And then $25,000 for our risk and compensated absences funds. So now that we know what's included in the assumptions, we can look at the forecast itself. We are projecting, we ended last fiscal year very well, as you know, from our meeting in February with our auditor, 700,000 plus in revenues over expenditures. Many of those we don't expect to carry forward into the current fiscal years. They were due to transitions and vacancies that we held for quite a long period of time. So this year we are projecting to end the year a balance, but pretty close to break even, about $2,000 left. We'll get a broader picture as we move into third quarter, and we'll update the council again. After that, for 2021, we're looking at a $428,000 deficit at this point, and that continues to grow through fiscal year 2029, up to almost $1.5 million. Want to note with that This assumes CalPERS does not lower the discount rate any further than the 7%. There's speculation that may happen, but there's no guarantee at this point. So should something like that happen that's significant, these numbers would change drastically and for the worse. Given these projections, what this will tell you is that we will have used up our emergency reserves at the end of fiscal year 24-25. By fiscal year 2026, we will we'll be in a deficit of $116,000 in reserves. We won't have enough cash on hand to meet the obligations. And this is really why it's important to look at this in a long-term perspective so we can start preparing and planning for those situations now and make conscious decisions today that will affect our future going forward. Our general fund revenues, the top three sources of revenue are property tax, TOT, and sales tax. That makes up 66% of our general fund budget. Other revenues are business license, fees, permits, fines, and rental income. We continue to be highly dependent on our TOT, which is great when the economy is doing well and tourism is doing well, but could be problematic should the economy turn and we see a change in our tourist patterns. So we want to remain cognizant of that. Our general fund expenditures continue to hold vacant or defund the deputy city manager position. As I mentioned, our positions are budgeted at one step above current salaries if there's capacity for that. Many of our employees are already at top step, but those that aren't, there's room for them to move up. We've included the higher pension costs and the estimated pension payoff rates for our Tier 2 and Tier 3. We've included a little bit of CPI growth for our operating costs. We have our tourism contribution in there, and then again, minimum funding for our internal service replacement funds. When we think about our pension costs, that's really one of the biggest drivers of the outlook for the future year. It's like every other city that is in PERS. This isn't unique to us, and it's really outside of our control what CalPERS does. We are projecting a 68% increase in those costs from fiscal year 2020 to 21 through 30-31. That's $1.2 million. And that takes into account the payoff that we just did at the last council meeting. So that's a significant increase over the next 10 years, and we need to figure out a way to address that. And again, that assumes the discount rate will stay at 7%. To give you a sense of where we are with our unfunded accrued liability, total citywide is $26 million. This is a $2.3 million increase from our last valuation report. You can see they're all for the Tier 1 employees, the classic employees. That's where the biggest burden is borne for the accrued liability, because that is where when the stock market crashed and those unfunded liabilities came on, we didn't have Tier 2 and Tier 3 at that time. Those were part of the pension reform that the state did to help address the pension rates going forward. So our 10-year financial update, well, we know we have challenges going forward. We have to keep those in the context of what have we already done to address the issues that we have. We've reduced staff for the last 9 years by 2.5 employees. That's eliminating a deputy city manager, saving $120,000 a year. It would grow each year after, obviously, so $120,000 is a conservative estimate. We eliminated the capital projects manager, senior engineer position. Our harbor department eliminated a position and reduced a position to part-time. We have reorganized our utility division and reduced 2 FTEs in the water, sewer, and treatment plant funds. Recreation Services has reduced their office assistant from full-time to part-time. We did reduce our part-time hours and hired 2 full-time maintenance aides to provide frontline services. Because we reduced part-time hours, there was no general fund cost impact to that. We've reinstated our school resource officer position, but that's been funded through our partnership with the school districts, so the general fund is not bearing a cost to that. Outsourced our dispatch. And while we still pay through contract services for dispatch, that's really prevented us from accruing any long-term liabilities for those employees. So there's savings to the city in exchange for that. Proactively, we've also paid off the city's fire safety side fund. We saved some interest in that and reduced future costs. We make our annual unfunded liability payments in July now in one lump sum rather than amortized over the 12 months in the fiscal year. In the last 2 years, that saved the city about $140,000 in interest. We've negotiated pension participation. That means cost sharing with our Police Officers Association. We've had some creative labor agreements, the ones that are expiring, and they have included revenue targets and metrics in there that the city had to receive in order for employees to receive COLAs. And we've recently just paid off our pension Tier 2 and Tier 3 unfunded liabilities, saving $160,000 in interest and reduced future costs. We were successful in being able to purchase a new fire engine. That occurred because of our Bertha Schultz Fire Donation Fund as well as our Measure Q fund. So we're thankful for those. We have a partnership policy, which is proving to match community groups in the city and provide lower cost services than we would otherwise be able to afford. Our new tourism strategic plan, encouraging more overnight stays in Morro Bay, which results in higher TOT and sales tax. We are in the process of finalizing our fee study update. Most of those fees have been adopted at this point and are being phased in over the next couple of years. This is helping to align our fees with our actual cost of services. We've permitted 2 medical cannabis shops. They're expected to open late spring, early summer of this calendar year. And our partnership with the Chamber to provide economic development, ombudsman, and stewardship services. We also, as staff, wanted to look at some metrics of how we've performed as a city over the last 10 years, 9 to 10 years. So we went back and tried to gather some data. Again, we reduced our FTEs by 2.5 positions. Our staff costs have gone up 24%, and that's really the driver of that is our pension and healthcare. And then our operating expenditures has actually decreased by 2%. That doesn't include our contract services, but our operating expenditures like supplies and materials. So we've decreased that by 2%. When we look at our per capita cost of services, these are general fund services only. We've increased our cost per capita of services 12% over 10 years. So that's 1% increase over a 12-year period, from $1,190 per person to $1,333 per person. So we looked at these to kind of give us a sense of context of where we're at, what's happened over the last 10 years, especially as fairly new employees. It's helpful for us in guiding where we look going forward into the next budget and the future budget cycles. So we have a structural deficit. We've talked about that before. That shouldn't be a surprise. We need to know what to do with that most immediately for fiscal year 2021. The council's identified their priorities. We completed the community survey and are extending that outreach to identify community priorities. Our city manager is going to talk a little bit about that and then how that will feed into our next upcoming budget and how we develop that budget going forward.
Thank you, Jen. All right. So council authorized the funding of a survey to be conducted across the community, and that took place in late October, early November. We were able to survey through random sampling 326 voters registered in the city of Morro Bay who are likely to vote in November 2020. Because the change in sort of behaviors around phones, a lot of people just aren't talking on phones anymore. We did have to use online sampling, and that does raise the margin of error. Typically using a 3%, now it's up into the 5.4%. So it's something to keep in mind. Surveys were provided in English and Spanish, and some of the sums don't add up to 100% due to rounding. So we tested a number of things, including beginning with community perceptions. At the high level, just looking at how, and we're able to compare a lot of these to the survey that was done in 2005. For reference, St. Louis Obispo County, just looking at are things moving in the right or wrong direction, pretty much holding steady. Same with the city of Morro Bay, mainly holding steady between 2005 compared to 2019. And then we moved into more specific departmental reviews and predominantly supportive of our public safety in some of our other high-profile departments. The City of Morro Bay Fire Department improved its rating when you're looking at those who rate the service as excellent or good, up to 90% in 2019 from 83 in 05. The Police Department up to 77%. Again, those who rate excellent or good compared to 71 in 05. Recreation Department up to 67 from 57. We didn't test Public Works in 05, but they got a rating up over 54%, and Morro Bay City Government overall improved from 31 to 40%. And then moving into perceived issues, this was a good test, and one of our community members had mentioned the cost of housing. That did rank as the highest issue that was tested in terms of being an extremely or very serious problem, excuse me. That was the number one issue. Next to that is the concern about waste and inefficiency in the Morro Bay City Government at 43% being an extremely or very serious problem. Homelessness rated up there. And then you can see as we move down the list of other issues that were ranked. Won't go through all of those, but this is online on the city's website on the front page if people are interested in reviewing more in depth. And then we looked at those issues that were both ranked in 05 and in 2019 for comparison purposes. Again, the issue of inefficiency and waste jumped a bit from 37 to 43. Concerns about taxes being paid, still relatively low in terms of concern. Working on down to the quality of streets and roads. It was a bigger issue in 05, and that's in a lot of ways Measure Q is addressing that through funding our pavement management program. And again, you can see on down the line other issues in terms of their relative concern to the community. We did test the specific question about maintaining local control over police and fire, as that's been a discussion in the past in our community. When posed with that question, 81% of respondents said maintain Morro Bay's own local police and fire departments, with 12 saying contract that with outside agencies. When asked what if they believe the city of Morro Bay needs additional funding, about 70% said there's a great need, some need, or a little need, compared to 21 who said there's no real need, or 9 who didn't know. And then went into a theoretical funding measure just to test and see where our community is at. Specifically, a general sales tax of 1%, again, just to test it. The overall rating coming back said 62% would support a 50+1 measure. Definitely yes, probably yes, or undecided lean yes, 62, with 33 on the undecided lean no, probably no, or definitely no, with 5% undecided. And then asked, it was split into two subgroups who were asked different questions, a lot of the same questions, but one was to ask folks whether they believe there was is essential to maintain current levels of service versus improving the current level of city services, and you can see a drastic difference. Those who were asked to maintain, 74% extremely important, very important, or somewhat important, and those asked if we should improve upon the city services, or level of city services, only 49% said that's extremely important, very important, or somewhat important. So again, the emphasis is on maintaining what we have. And then sort of asking where should the money be spent, or where's your level of priority. I won't go through all of these, but on the first page gives you those that cross the 80% threshold of extremely important or very important to support, and somewhat important. requiring public disclosure of all spending. That's a very important component for our community in terms of transparency and accountability. And then maintaining 24/7 911 emergency response, paramedic response, keeping our beaches and public areas and public restrooms safe and clean, working on down to other, the police services and harbor cleanliness. Those all ranked above 80%. So that kind of gives you an idea of where our community is at in terms of level of priority. And there's a whole set of other issues that were tested in terms of importance, so I won't go through all of those. But again, this is on the front page of the city website for folks to review. We also did test a potential harbor parcel tax to create a district for the harbor, as they also are experiencing significant financial challenges. I won't go through the whole thing, but ultimately there was 47% support for a 2/3 vote for passage of a parcel tax to support the harbor district idea. And now that we have those results, we're really focused on gathering more community input, as another community member mentioned tonight. Not everybody responded to the survey, and we're certainly doing everything we can to get as many folks involved in the discussion, going out to community groups, going to all of the advisory committees, and encouraging them to reach out to their friends and colleagues to make sure we have a robust discussion and engagement around the upcoming budget decisions for our city council, as well as future budget decisions. So happy to answer any questions about that, the survey, or the 10-year forecast. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentations, plural. And the task before us tonight is to really give feedback with regard to the 10-year plan and the overall financial condition. One note, based upon one of the public comments that was made, this is not the budget that we're approving tonight. This is a tool. This is a piece of information. And so a potential structural deficit exists if nothing is done. But California cities are required by law to have balanced budgets, and we have had a balanced budget every year, and we'll continue to do that by law. And so I'll just make that note going into this. Again, this is one of the tools. I want to commend staff. This was initially brought forward in 2015 through moderately expensive exercise. Management Partners created the tool, and Ms. Calloway and her group brought it in-house, thereby avoiding the costs of those continual updates, and have gone through the process internally to avoid costs of bringing back the consultant, and I think have done a very good job in doing that, and we appreciate your commitment to maintaining costs or lowering costs and limiting expenses by not using consultants for that. In addition, thank you, Mr. Collins, for marrying the community input and desires. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to just open it up. And again, this is both questions or comments. If you have questions, that's fine. Comments together, they're looking for direction. One of the things I'll make note of is if you don't live and breathe city finance and the city operations, it's very difficult, I think, to get the overall picture of what's happening in the city. And that's not to say that you couldn't do that if you spent a significant amount of time looking at the voluminous data that I know council looks at and staff looks at in order to make prudent decisions, and looking at pieces of it without understanding the whole sometimes leads to conclusions that may not be drawn correctly. And I just want to make that note. From my perspective, the city financial condition is significant. I mean, there's no doubt. We've had a balanced budget every year, and that is because it's been required by law. Now, a year ago, we had to raise some internal capital funds in order to do that, but we gave direction that that should not occur again. One note that I'll make to start with is that the almost total absence of any capital funding for the future of the city. not only from the general fund, but also from the perspective of the enterprise fund, except for the water sewer fund, which is a separate issue, and we talk about that ad nauseum, and we know the finances there. That being said, what it means is when equipment breaks and things collapse and buildings fall down, there's no fund to replace it, and it becomes an emergency. That's just not good, prudent fiscal planning. But when you have a city like Morro Bay that has a single-engine economy, which is tourism, that is dependent upon tourists coming and disposable income being there and spending money, you are at jeopardy significantly of changes in not only the national economy, but individuals' own personal disposable income and the economic variables associated with that. And if you look at the three sources of revenue that we have, TOT, sales tax, and property tax, they're basically flat over the last 4 years. Now, we've had some small increases, but I'm saying if you look over a broader period of time, that revenue source, which is our primary revenue source, is not sustainable in terms of maintaining the basic services or functions of the city. That's a known. Unless the economy here is somewhat diversified and new sources of revenue come in, it will be very difficult to survive on trying to grow TOT, not that we shouldn't do that, trying to grow sales tax, not that we shouldn't do that, and property tax is what it is. It just is what it is. We don't have large parcels, large businesses that contribute significant amounts, and that's pretty much a flat line over the last 10 years if you look at that. The problem, in my opinion, with the city is a revenue problem. I said it last year and I'll say it again. Unless the city has a marked increase in incremental revenues in a very short period of time, we are going to find it very difficult to maintain core services. And you'll note that to the community, core services are extremely important. Police, fire, administration, everything that we do as a city, but basic public safety services. Note also from previous discussions that we are falling farther behind in pay ranges for important city individuals that work for the city. Police, fire, etc. If you compare our city to other locales around San Luis Obispo County, we're losing ground, despite the fact that we've been able to do some cost of living increase each year. Note that this 10-year plan assumes no cost of living increase, which translates to being even further behind, which potentially leads to the problem of turnover and decreased productivity in some of the major areas of concern for the city. The first thing that I think we should all think of is what expense reduction opportunities does this city have in order to reduce our government spending, as opposed to just thinking about taxing and trying to increase or grow revenues through some payback from the community or tourists or whatever. And if you really dive into this data, I think one of the most telling things for me is on page 6 of 46 of the staff report. And I appreciated the per capita information that staff presented us with. Over the past 10 years, on a per capita basis, the average increase in the cost of the general fund city services, not the harbor fund, not the water fund, just general fund city services, has only grown on an average of about 1% per year. If you look at CPI, just basic CPI over 10 years has averaged over 2.6%. That's not sustainable as a city. What that means is that the city has continuously tightened its belt, yet not only maintained, but in my opinion, improved and sometimes advanced core services that we deliver. And what I was talking about on a day-to-day basis, if you speak with these people and you interact with them, they're working hard. They're working long hours because they're committed to the city and its future. And for the most part, they have a love of being here. And I don't think we give our staff enough gratitude for the fact that, again, they're not the highest paid group of employees in the county, but maybe the most dedicated group of employees in the county, and also provide some of the best services with regard to core services, in my opinion, in the county. One of the telling numbers to me, if you look at the 10-year plan and Ms. Callaway's projections for 2029 on expenses, in 2029, expenses are expected for the general fund to grow to $18.863 million. Assuming a population of about 10,500, because Morro Bay is just not growing, if you do the calculation that she's done per capita, over the next 10 years, the average annual increase in expenses is going to be 3.47% or 34.7% in 10 years, as opposed to a 1% average annual increase for the prior 10 years. And you might ask, well, what's up with that? Isn't government spending out of hand? Well, if you look at the detail of the data and you construct it appropriately, you will see that the majority of that is the unfunded pension liability of the city, for which the city has absolutely no control over. And I'll say that again. The CalPERS discount rate, currently at 7%, and the unfunded liability associated with that, we have no control over. You can't tighten that belt. You can advocate at the state level, which we do. 90% of cities are suffering from this same issue, and the most scary part of this to me is nobody believes that CalPERS is going to make 7% over the next 10 years. And so if the discount rate is truly only 6%, can you imagine the increase in incremental expenses to the city if that discount rate were lowered and were more realistic? And we can't model that because it's not true as of yet. But when you look around the state and you talk to actuarials, nobody believes that CalPERS will make 7% each year for the next 10 years, which makes this prospect look even more dismal. And then you're going to look at us as policymakers and say, what are you doing to correct this? What is staff doing to correct this? Well, I know for a fact that Ms. Callaway and Mr. Collins and staff have involved numerous people, employees throughout the organization, to be involved with cost-cutting measures. And my message is that there is not an absolute that says you can never further cut costs. And I know they're continuing to look at that. But you know, when you do surgery on an infected leg, and you continue to cut away at tissue that is infected, sooner or later you hit bone. And when you hit bone, it's over. And I would tell you that the city of Morro Bay is very close to hitting bone. Now, this isn't a scare tactic, it's reality. I'm optimistic. Why? I do believe we have a plan in place for revenue increases, some intermediate, some long-term, but one, I believe, absolutely necessary to get us to a place where we can continue to provide the core services that we are currently providing to the city that city folks tell us that they demand. The intermediate prospects are things such as new hotels that will bring new TOT, which are in process. If you've been watching the Planning Commission, Marketplace Plaza incrementally can bring significant increases in TOT, sales tax revenues, etc. And economic development opportunities with our partner organization, the Chamber, who's been working very hard to identify opportunity sites and bring developers into this community to advance the economy here. Those are intermediate 4 or 5 year opportunities that hopefully will come to fruition as we move forward. The long-term opportunities, the significant opportunities, are the redevelopment of the Vistra plant, which actually should have started over 10 years ago when the news was heard that there was going to be a closure. And contrary to maybe popular belief, this council has been working very hard with the new owner. Dynegy no longer owns the property, working very closely with Vistra to look at redevelopment opportunities. And for the first time, I am encouraged as a council member, as a mayor, that something is going to happen. That could mean huge incremental increases in revenue for the city 5 or so years from now. The second is wind energy. The DOD recently has indicated there is a willingness to open up an area off of Morro Bay. It's a preferential site. However, that site cannot be developed for 5 to 7 years. No pun intended, but that could be a windfall for Morro Bay with regard to new sources of economically diversified revenue opportunities. But the challenge, I believe, before us right now is that unless we have a significant incremental increase in general fund revenues through a sales tax initiative this year in November, we are going to be in dire straits. Now remember that tourists pay approximately, and correct me if I'm wrong, 70% of the sales tax dollar that is spent in Morro Bay. In other words, sales tax dollars, 70% of which that we collect are generated by tourists. Well, I say it's time that our tourists share in the cost of infrastructure payments to the city. That would potentially bring to the city a $2 million increase in general fund dollars that would allow us to maintain the core services that the community has said they desire to see continued, which are fantastically great core services. And I'm proud to be, in this community where we feel safe, secure, where we have proactive thinkers, and we have people that are willing to work hard for pay that is lesser than the pay that the majority of the other county workers get. And when you pull out pieces of this and try to tear apart the construct of what is happening with this staff and this council, it bothers me greatly. It bothers me greatly that there are 8 people in the audience. Thank you for being here. Maybe there are thousands at home that are watching. The notice did go out on Friday. It wasn't just 24 hours ago. We will have further sessions. But ladies and gentlemen, I tell you that the time is now, that staff is working diligently as good stewards of your dollars, to be transparent. We've won 2 awards nationally for our financial policies and reporting. Our general fund reserves are twice the recommended from GFOA. And we are set, at least in the short term, for that potential recession. By the way, that is coming. The stock market was down 2,000 points. The Dow was down 2,000 points in the last 2 days. And it's a little dicey out there right now. So with that, I'll get off of my soapbox and say that I'm proud. And I'm thankful for staff, for the analysis that you do, for the information that you provide, for your hard work efforts, for all that you do to keep Morro Bay safe and sound, and for your belief in a future that is solid and has opportunity. And as your mayor, I will strive to see that continue. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to somebody else who'd like to make some comments.
Mayor Heading, I am totally impressed by the clarity and depth of your analysis of our situation. And I know we have that on tape and something that needs to be replayed over and over. I have been walking through neighborhoods for the past 2 months, handing out my own survey of asking people what services are important, what capital projects are important to them. And the results I'm getting very closely match what we got with our consultants poll. So far, I have distributed 284 questionnaires, and I have received back 96. The highest rated service for value is emergency response, police, fire, and paramedic. 88% value that very highly. Second is street and sidewalk maintenance. And third is public restroom maintenance and trash pickup. And the overwhelming number one important capital project is street maintenance and repairs. And one of the things I note from these results is that these are services that have been previously supported by our voters through Measure Q. They continue to be the highest value services that we provide. And we need, the additional revenue that we need is not to improve any of these services, but simply to maintain the services that we currently provide. And I am also impressed that sales tax is 70% paid by visitors, and a great deal of the services that we provide in infrastructure are visitor serving. So thank you for your analysis, sir.
Member Brandes.
Yeah, well, I would like to concur with that. And Scott, I think you've mentioned this before, but could you mention again, would Morro Bay be the only city going out for a sales tax increase? Or what would that look like in the context of the rest of the county and surrounding areas?
I think all cities and the county included potentially are considering something for the November ballot. They're also going through similar conversations with their councils and community, so it's hard to predict where they'll wind up. We do know that a significant number are going forward in March, so in a month from now, less than a month from now, that is. Several cities will be looking at sales tax or TOT increases.
And do you know if the percent is typically as high as 1%, or if they're looking at something smaller?
It's across the board. I mean, some cities, up north are sort of reaching their maximum that's allowed by the state. We're nowhere near that here in SLO County. We're all relatively low sales tax compared to the rest of the state, and we're all about at the same rate right now, I think.
And have you heard if the rationale is similar, needing to maintain core services?
Yeah, most of the cities are in a position to maintain what they have. Some are in an exalted position to be able to expand upon what they have, but most are simply in a position to maintain the expectations of their community.
And is there anything that you've seen that would even come close? I know the mayor's opinion, he was very eloquent in his thinking on this, but is there anything you've seen on the staff side that would even come close to bridging the gap in the way that we need to immediately bridge the gap?
Maybe you mean in terms of,
Economic development or raising revenue in any other way? Like, do we have any other options to, I know the mayor feels like we don't, and he was very eloquent in saying that. On the staff side, have you seen anything else that would even come close to this?
I would look just sort of back the last 10 years, and Ms. Calloway sort of listed them out, the movement that's been made in terms of contracting out services and reducing administrative staff positions and the like, that a lot of that has been pursued. Of course, my job and her job and directors are always there to sort of seek innovations, and that's not always with the mindset of cost cutting, but being able to reallocate resources to the higher priority needs with newer technologies that are coming online. We are somewhat at a disadvantage because those technologies cost a lot of money to have the capital to invest in them, but they have long-term payoffs. So those are areas that we're always looking at. This council's been very supportive of that. Just recently the part-time staff to address the very important public records requests surrounding the Wharf Project and others. Those are really good short-term decisions that the council has pushed forward. So I think we're doing the maximum amount that we can given where we're at. It's a balance, of course. You can't. You got to be careful how far you go on the revenue side, because it's your businesses and your community members. It has to consider the impacts there. And I will note, it's a nuance, but on the sales tax piece, visiting folks, whether tourists or not, pay 70% of the business to consumer sales tax. There's business to business transactions that are different, a different category, but those that are the ones you would probably recognize as a consumer, the 70% is paid by outside residents or visitors.
I would just add to that on the revenue side, the most immediate thing in our horizon is cannabis, with the 2 medical shops opening up. However, with them being medical only as they currently are, that won't be as drastic of a revenue surge in terms of the 5% that the city receives outside of sales tax. So if those were expanded to adult use, we'd likely get significantly more.
And one final note is just on, sort of raising all boats, using economic development to help spur that, and using partnerships with the chamber. Typically cities will fund entire departments for economic development, and having a really cost-efficient method with chamber serving as the ombudsman is allowing us to open doors that we otherwise couldn't with just staff participation.
It seems, though, that recreational cannabis would be one of those intermediate to longer-term fixes, seeing as how we don't have recreational cannabis.
Right.
And economic development is a little, it's
right.
a process, whereas we need immediate fixes.
Right. Yeah, the cannabis could be as soon as the summer, but you can't bank on those revenues because we haven't had the industry. It's been a black market. So bringing it into a legal market, we don't know what the payoff will be, so you can't budget for those until you've had some experience. Obviously, an immediate injection of revenues via a measure would have the most pronounced impact on the deficit.
And then just finally, what's your level of concern around being one of the lowest paid cities in the area in terms of safety personnel and other really important city employees?
Sure. All city employees are important. As you all know, we're down to, I think, 96 or 97 in FTE. I think the height was over 110 before the big recession. So every staff member counts. There's no bloated bureaucracy that I see here. They do a lot with little, and they're very innovative, and it's well known where we rank in terms of our salary against our competitive set. And I think part of the reason we're able to retain folks despite that is the culture and the support from the community. But yeah, it can only take you so far, particularly as member of the community mentioned, affordability is a real issue, and less of our employees are able to live in Morro Bay, and living further and further away, that creates strain for them. And so pay is certainly a determination in that equation. So I can't answer from each one of their perspective, but it certainly is an issue. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Councilmember Hiller? Thanks.
So a few questions. Great report, great information. It's delivered in a detailed fashion that we haven't really seen before, which I much appreciate. Frankly, though, there are no surprises here. We've known this for a long time. I think it's time for the council to act. I have some questions. The 1% sales tax rate you're projecting would generate $2 million in revenue annually, which basically, if we applied it to managing the pavement of the streets, perhaps, would just keep the streets at a PCI of 66. Am I looking at that number correct?
Yeah, if one thing to note is we spend about $1 million, give or take, with pavement and management from Measure Q plus Senate Bill 1 money, correct? If you put that all together, is it about, where are we at right now? We're at 700,000.
700,000.
Okay, so 700,000 is a good year for us, Councilmember Heller. We, to get to the $2 million means we'd need another 1.3 to maintain the current PCI.
Okay.
So, yeah, that would be a healthy portion of that amount.
Okay.
Yes.
And do we have any idea at all what the cannabis operations are going to generate for us?
We don't. We certainly know how it's working for Grover Beach, but they're sort of, theirs is a wider array of businesses, including dispensaries, but also manufacturing and testing. So
we don't have an estimate.
We're I would say the several $100,000 range is probably conservative, but again, without actually having some experience, we're very careful about budgeting that amount.
Sure. Yes. Okay. And are we collecting our fair share of TOT across the board?
We are collecting TOT. We've talked before about we are auditing what we collect, per se. We're in the process of getting some cost estimates to audit our TOT and our gross receipts from the harbor to make sure that we're collecting everything from all the sources that we currently have.
So we're not sure if we're collecting it all or not right now, right? There's no regular audit in place?
There's no auditing. Every hotel is submitting, but we're
Okay.
not auditing what they
Oh,
submit.
you're hiring a consultant to start auditing? Is that what you said?
Our
or-
sales tax consultant provides those services, and there's a couple others. We're getting a cost estimate as to how much that would be.
Okay. Full cost recovery of fees, we've talked about that a bunch. What is holding us up from implementing that right away?
So we phased in, the majority of those fees phased in the first round, January 1. The next phase in, there'll be a report coming back in March. The end of March, you'll see the CPI increases as well as the outstanding handful of fees that we haven't phased in yet. The major one being, there's 2 in the harbor department, and then the building fees. We're still engaged with the chamber on those fees and how they'll impact the businesses. Council wanted some more information on that, and then we'll have our impact fees. So those will go into effect for July 1, and then the final phase will be July 1, 2021.
Okay. I think it's important that that get done as quickly as possible. It's a place where we really have neglected for many years in this community, and there's money there that we need to collect or reduce services. So the 1% sales tax, are other cities going for 1.25% or 1.5%? I mean, you know?
That's a great question, Councilmember Heller. I'm not aware of anyone going higher than 1. There are cities that have higher than 1% increment through a series of measures, but I'm not aware of anybody going for more than 1. Most are in the 0.5 to 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm struck by in the surveying, and I brought this up several occasions for many months ago, is that there doesn't seem to be any questions regarding an increase in property tax or a special assessment, and I know that requires a 2/3 vote, but what would be the vehicle to generate revenue from properties?
You can do a variety of like assessment districts or parcel tax, those kind of things. The reason those weren't included in this survey was the council had directed interest in a sales tax in a harbor assessment district. So that was what was pulled based on the council conversation.
Those are the questions I have. I guess my comments are, first of all, it's great information. Second of all, it's something we've known for a long time. Thirdly, I look to city staff to come up with some kind of a menu or combinations of things. We can do this, this, and this, and if we raise the rate this much, this will, generate enough revenue to get us here. If we're more aggressive, this is Plan B. It'll take care of us through 28, 29. Those kinds of things. That's what I look to staff for, really. I don't think there's anything new here. I don't think anyone has a silver bullet. Everyone is working hard. This is an amazing community in terms of the amount of volunteerism, and what people do for free here is phenomenal. I think we know what the community wants, and we have for a long, long time. They want those fundamental services, and I think if we can find ways to provide those services, the rest of the stuff will just kind of fall by the wayside. But I really do look to staff to come up with some simple solutions, 2 or 3 choices that we can talk to the community about. That's kind of it in a nutshell for me. Thank you all. Great information.
Thanks, Jeff. Councilmember McPherson.
Yeah, thank you. I do have just a couple questions, and then I have some comments to make. First of all, I just wanted to confirm with you, Jennifer, that when you prepare this 10-year forecast, you are quite conservative in that you don't count any revenue that we aren't really sure of. So you did not include any kind of projections for the marijuana dispensaries or anything else, even the fee increases that take effect because they hadn't taken effect. Is that correct?
So the fee increases to the extent that we approved things like the application fee for business license. We've accounted for those. We have not accounted for the building fees because we don't know what they're going to end up at yet, and that's a substantial portion of the fees that we receive. So once we have some resolution on that in March, we'll update our revenue projections for the budget for 2020-21. And the reason we can do that with fees is it's based on some level of known activity. We know we're going to have building. We know what the new fee is, and we can project that out. For cannabis, it's a brand new revenue source. Per our council policy, revenues that are new go to one-time funding needs. So we wouldn't include them in the general fund for ongoing expenditures anyways. And that reason is just because we need to make sure they're going to be reliable ongoing revenue sources before we build them into our base budget for the future years. We don't count on hotels that are maybe in the process of approvals because you don't know if they're going to ultimately get approved.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that it's based on what you know at this point in time, and you didn't make any assumptions about additional revenue based on things that are in the works, and that hopefully we will have more revenue than what you've projected because of those additional things that will come through.
I would say that it's very conservative both on the revenue and expenditure side.
Okay. And are you looking to us today for some direction that would help you in preparing the next fiscal year budget? So that do you want us to address those assumptions that it's based on?
To the extent that there's some direction you can provide, that would be great. We gave you the assumptions so you would know where we're starting the budget season with. If there's something in there that you feel strongly about at this point in time, again, this isn't the budget hearing, but any feedback we get, we will incorporate or be able to take
moving
back.
forward. Okay. All right. As to comments, I fully support what the mayor has said. I think we absolutely have a staff that works hard, and I know that our staff is absolutely at the bare minimum. I don't know if the public is aware of the fact that both our police and fire departments are staffed at the absolute minimum number of officers required to provide 24/7 coverage. And so the choice is really, do you want to reduce coverage and not have a police officer available 24/7 or a fire a person to come when you call. So it's really important, I think, for the public to understand exactly where we're at this point in time and how much we actually rely on volunteers to help us provide these services. We have volunteer fire folks and we have volunteer police officers that are on the streets, and so we are actually relying on a lot of volunteers plus all of the community organizations that provide services that this community depends on. So I think that in the next couple of months, it's going to be incumbent upon us to carry on the conversation and get more feedback from more people on what they perceive to be the priorities, and also to help to educate them about the real current state of our budget. We have a balanced budget, and I think the staff has been very creative in balancing it up to this point in time, and they have made cuts, but moving forward, there will be a structural deficit that we have to take care of. And so we're asking the public to help us to determine how to do that. And I do want to mention that we have received a number of different options from staff, and council has made decisions in the past directing how we wanted to move forward on these. I know one of them was paid parking. We looked at a number of revenue enhancement options and decided on a couple of them to move forward with more information on. And that's really the process that we're in now, is to find out if it's possible to do a sales tax increase, if there's enough support in the community to proceed with it. But they really do have to fully appreciate and understand the situation that we're in. I also just want to say finally that I do appreciate in your staff report that you've got the staff working on new creative ways to provide the services. The staff is actually thinking about it, trying to think of new ways to provide the same level of services in ways that might be more efficient. And so it's important to keep that process going, and I applaud you for doing it and for this report. So thank you.
Great. Excellent comments across the board. Thank you all for that. I'll add one thing that wasn't mentioned in detail, and that is the Harbor Enterprise Fund is just as dismal. And I'm not looking at Eric because it's his fault, but let me just tell you that in my humble opinion, the revenues, which are primarily from leasehold interests, will never fully fund the harbor district or the harbor. They're literally, again, in the Harbor Enterprise Fund, there are no capital funds for improvement. There are potential for revetment failures that could result in millions of dollars worth of capital costs for which we have no reserves to pay for. I am extremely concerned about this. I know right now there's no appetite for the creation of a harbor district, and I appreciate Councilmember Heller's comment about the property tax assessments and the potential for that, and just want to make note that the leasehold interests in terms of the major source of revenue will never, in my opinion, be able to fully fund an ongoing viable harbor, including capital improvements that are necessary. And somewhere in the future, we have to look at innovative ways to increase revenues for the Harbor Enterprise Fund, because my fear is that that major capital issue on that large infrastructure across our beautiful bay, somewhere along the line is going to fail and cost us some money. So I'm paying particular attention to that as well. Lastly, obviously the Water and Sewer Fund we talk about almost every meeting, and so that is fully funded and we know the finances there, and I'll make no comment with regard to that. Again, my thanks to staff for all of your work. Thank thank you for this tool, an excellent tool. Perhaps I'll weigh in on the questions you had on page number 4. I think what I'm hearing is we're concerned about the fact that there are no COLAs in the 10-year forecast, and we're concerned about maintaining some better parity with other communities in San Luis Obispo County to ensure a solid workforce and not have high turnover, which decreases productivity and increases costs. Somehow, I think we all agree that the increase in healthcare costs, which are significant, I don't know what the answer is to that, but I would appreciate some further discussion on potential options or opportunities for reducing healthcare costs. I've talked about pension liability, which is out of our control for the most part, except for the pay downs that we have done, and I'm very proud of that and would continue to support that. I absolutely believe that economic partnership with in the future with the Chamber is paramount to success in the future. That's one of our intermediate steps for diversifying this economy, and without their assistance, I don't see it happening. We didn't talk about T-bid contribution, but I do believe Council weighed in on this at a meeting a number of months ago, and I don't know that the attitudes have changed with regard to reduction in that line item issue. We also talked about not raiding capital funds to balance the budget in the future, maintaining the current level of general fund reserve. And we do have a policy for that will allow us to do that. I also agree with your capital replacement fund. Personally, I agree with the allocations you have there, although they're woefully underfunded. Not your fault, but it's all you can do to at least place a small amount of dollars into those funds at now. And if there are other comments on some of the items that they raised, I would ask anybody to make those now. If not, I'll ask staff Councilmember Addis, did you have a comment?
I think I've expressed it before, but employee retention is key to me in terms of looking at why we need to find solutions. And so I would just emphasize that's a huge piece to me, is making sure that we can retain the good employees that we have and possibly attract others, given what the community has said about the importance of safety services.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis, yes.
Yes, and I want to also agree about the importance of continuing our partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. We are implementing our economic development strategic plan, and for me, the linchpin of that has always been having the ombudsman position, which we cannot fund as a city employee, but we can work with the Chamber very effectively in helping to develop that plan.
Yes, Councilmember McPherson.
I was just going to say I fully agree with that. I also think we need to continue that funding, so I would put that in the budget.
Jeff, any further comments? Okay, great. So with that, again, thanks to staff for an interesting discussion and enlightening information. Appreciate all the work that you've done, and again, especially for obtaining community feedback and tying that to priorities in the future. I will remind you of the 4 goals that have been established by the city, and as always, both capital and operational budgets are always tied to major goals, and so if you haven't reviewed those, please do, community. Those are extremely important and have been set by you. With that, if there are no other comments, I will close the special meeting, adjourn, and we will be back at 5:30 p.m. for our regular Morro Bay City Council meeting. Thank you and good evening.